The last 3 videos in this series I focused on the first games my cousins got shortly after we got our first NES. Today I'm going to be talking about my first game, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers for the NES. This game is an absolute Capcom classic and a must-have for any NES collection. Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers was released in June of 1990. I got my copy on December 25th of that year when I finally got my own NES for Christmas. I remember when I first saw it I was a little bummed because I didn't get any Mario games, which at the time was the reason I wanted an NES, but I quickly found out this game was amazing as well. This game is part of a long list of really good Disney licensed games that Capcom made between 1989 and 1994. This game came out right after DuckTales for the NES. Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers was produced by Tokaru Fujiwara, who also worked on Mega Man 2 as well as Ghosts 'n Goblins. The Japanese and European versions are slightly different than the American versions because they contain fixes for some minor graphical glitches. Like many titles of the late 80s and early 90s, this game is a side-scrolling platform game, but what makes Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers extremely unique is that it had a 2-player co-op mode. Most games of the day that had 2-player mode usually just had the 1-player game alternating between 2 players. Nearly all co-op modes were found in beat-em-ups like Double Dragon and run-and-gun games like Contra. The gameplay's pretty sweet. It's definitely not your run-of-the-mill platformer. You're jumping around these enormous environments, throwing boxes that you can pick up at enemies. There's 4 types of things that you can throw. The standard box, which you'll see laying around everywhere, and there's larger objects, like apples and tree trunks that slow you down slightly when you hold them. There's concrete blocks that you can't throw, but are reusable after you set them down, and lastly, there are red balls that bounce off the sides of the screen and are only used for boss fights. There's also one level where you can pick up a hammer and whack your enemies with it. It seems a little out of place, but it's super fun, so I'm cool with it. The game is really enhanced by having someone else to play with you. I love that you're able to pick up the other player and literally carry them across the entire level. It's also a lot of fun to fight over the flower points and stars and see who can get the most points. Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers is pretty easy, especially for an NES title, and I kinda like that about it. It offers a good deal of challenge, but is actually beatable, unlike many games of the day. Probably the easiest thing about this game are the boss fights. Don't get me wrong though, there's no way you can get through this game if you're messing around too much since it's only 3 hits and you're dead, so despite it being a fairly easy game, it's still not a cakewalk. Between each level, you sometimes have an option to choose which path you want to take, which will determine the level you're going to play. Oftentimes, the longer route will have easier levels than the shorter route. Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, in my opinion, doesn't have the best music on the system. Some of the tracks are really upbeat and fun, but some can wear on your nerves. I think there are really only 2 tracks that I really like on the game, and you can probably hear them playing in the background. Capcom has some of the best music on the NES, but unfortunately this title doesn't reach the usual level of musical greatness that you'd expect from Capcom. Graphically, the game's pretty good looking. All the sprites look good and the environments are a lot of fun to look at. I love that everything is so huge based on your relative size. Jumping around the lights atop a casino, hopping around books in a library, running across the seats in a deli, all the environments are a blast to explore and really add to the charm of this game. If you're expecting a major plot that'll supplement what you've seen on the show, don't get your hopes up. There's a plot, but it's more fun to mash start and keep playing than to read about what's going on.
Spoiler alert.
Gadget gets kidnapped by Fat Cat, you rescue her, and then you go after Fat Cat. The whole plot in 15 words. There is one benefit to the dialogue sections, and that is that it sometimes will give you a hint about the level you're about to play. My most major complaint about Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers that I've had over the years is that you can't play as Monterey Jack, Gadget, or Zipper. As a kid watching Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, I always thought Monterey Jack was the coolest character, so I really wanted him to be playable. Currently, Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers is only $10 on Amazon, and according to PriceCharting.com is currently worth around $9. So the price is cheap and barely inflated. Of course, if you're able to find it in the wild for a better price, it's always your best bet. But this is one of the best titles for the NES, so only $10 is a steal. Since this is the first game I ever owned, I have so many great memories of playing this game, and with the 2-player co-op, it's a great game to bust out once in a while and play with a friend. Even if it only has 10 levels and can be beaten in under an hour, it's a really great experience that I couldn't recommend anymore.